Please just let me know if you guys can hear me properly and if the stream is up and running. Because it's not showing me that it's up and running on my end. There we go. Okay, welcome everyone. Thank you for attending the final exam for Introductory Java course. I'm calling it Java Games Programming because this is aside from our normal course. This is just something I'm offering from, from my own personal time. We have a final exam coming up. We had a bunch of requests for topics to cover. I believe these topics were, let me just pull them up here. I'm not pulling them up on my normal computer because there might be some private information here and there. Okay, so we had tracing. We had abstract classes, interfaces, file I/O, exceptions, privacy leaks, and recursion. These were the topics that were requested. Okay, so let's see. You're welcome. Okay, so we have a question right away. What do we mean by command line arguments? So these are arguments that you provide through the command line. So just an example. I'm going to use up a command prompt here. Increase the font size. Let's go with 28. So when we run a code, so let's say Java, my program, and we can here provide arguments as we've seen in the past. So let's say it's a program which takes in a number, let's say 5, and it adds up everything from 1 to 5. So this is a command line argument because we provide it as we are running the program, instead of requesting the input once the program is already running. Okay, so hopefully we might even see some example like this if we can work something up. Okay, so once again, my apologies for the delay in getting started, but what we'll try to do is try to cover one topic at a time. Once I'm done with my example, I'll go over and see if there's any questions. Once we've covered a topic completely, we'll move on to the next one, and hopefully we can do this a bit more streamlined this time so we can move a lot faster. So command line arguments are the ones that you put into the terminal after you type your program name Java, myprog, and in our case, let's say it's a string, hello world, something like that. Okay, so to get tracing started, I know this is something we did for the midterm review, but we had a number of requests for it again. So I'll use the same code I used the last time. So where we at 233, review. Let's start off with our sword class. So if you guys recall this one, I'm going to increase the font size. Okay. I just want to make sure that everything is showing well on the stream myself. Okay. Okay. So we have our class here. So let's say we want to, well, first of all, ignore all this. Let's say we want to create a new class sword object. So we do sword s1 equals new sword. Now, what are we going to see in our method trace is the execution of the method that are being called. So we know that we're calling the constructor here for the object sword. So we take a look here, we follow it to this method, and now we follow the line that the method that this method calls. So it's another constructor for this class, but it's the 4-value constructor we can count here. So integer, boolean, string, integer. So we go to the 4-line or 4-value constructor, and we take a look at the first line. So it calls the constructor in the superclass, the 2-value constructor in the superclass. So the superclass here is weapon itself. I'm going to close all of this. So we want to go see what's in weapon.java. Luckily, we have it right here. And we take a look here. Now the first line of the constructor, it's always something that starts with this something or super. If you don't provide this explicitly, then Java automatically puts in super like this. So since we didn't have anything in this class, or rather in this constructor, it's going to call the super for the generic object class. If you recall from Java, everything extends the generic object class eventually. So this calls that constructor for the generic constructor for object class. Then it goes out to these other lines. These two lines do not call any other method. This one might, but it's commented out luckily, so we don't have to worry about that. So once this constructor completes, it goes back to sword.java and it continues on with this line. So we continue here. This doesn't have any other call. This line doesn't have any other call. This line probably does, but we don't care because it's commented out. So then it jumps back here. There is no other line except for the commented one in this constructor, and so it finally returns back here. And this was our trace. So the way it worked was, I'm gonna create a new file here. We had the default constructor in our sword, which in turn called the 4-value constructor in sword. I'm just gonna call it 4 values instead of actually providing the arguments here. Now this in turn called the 2-value constructor in weapon.java, which finally called the default constructor in object class. Okay. So if I were to do that with nesting, or rather indenting, it will be something like this. Now this returns to weapon 2-value, and this returns to sword 4-value, which in turn returns to sword, and this returns to whatever the caller was. Okay, so this was really fast overview of what we did with method calling and tracing. Methods work the same way as constructors, except with constructors, the only thing we want to know about is if we don't have a call to another constructor as the first line or to the super constructor, Java automatically puts in the call to the object default constructor. Okay, I'm gonna go back to the chat and see what's going on there. We have a request for polymorphism. Okay. Once again, this is similar from midterm 2 review that we've done in the past. Okay, so Jack Dude, I'm not sure what you mean by the midterm questions for practice. I haven't looked at the practice exam for this, but practice helps a lot. If you want to redo your midterm, go right ahead. It will be beneficial. Okay. Okay. Ooh, I think we got a follow. Awesome. Okay, so we have abstract classes. Do we have abstract classes? We have. That's the next topic coming up. So that was gang. Okay. Anon BB. The session has already started. Hopefully you've joined in by now, and we can watch the video. Okay. So we have a question here. What is the object class in this case? So object is it's a class provided by the Java library itself, and that's the parent of all classes. And it represents a generic object in Java because, if you recall, Java is an object-oriented language. Therefore, every class is treated as an object. And at the topmost object class is the class itself, object. That's another good way to put it. Ramsky David, default superclass. Can we do questions on the practice final exam? Jack Dude, if you have specific question for the final exam, I would say let's wait till the very end of this these topics that I have, and then we can cover specific question afterwards. Once again, I haven't looked at the final exam practice myself, but I'd be happy to answer any questions afterwards. Okay. Now, do we have any other questions regarding tracing? Okay, so I'm hoping my stream didn't freeze. Okay, if we don't have any other questions regarding topics, we can go towards abstract classes and interfaces. I'll cover abstract classes first. So if we recall once again from our midterm review, abstract classes are classes, or rather object we want to be generic enough so that they have some information, but they're not complete enough or concrete enough to be an object on their own. So in our midterm 2 review, what we covered was we have a class called weapon, but it's a very generic class because a weapon can be very many different types of weapons. And for those who didn't join in for the midterm 2 review, I used weapons because I like D&D kind of video games kind of stuff, so I'm using that as a theme, especially since my channel is Zan's Gaming and this is part of Java Games Programming. So yeah, we're using weapons, but there can be generic weapons. This is a generic weapon. We could have different types of weapons such as swords, staves, axes, hammers, maces, whatever. Ranged weapon, melee weapons, however we can describe them. But the weapon itself is very generic. So we say that it's an abstract class. Now what that prevents is that a developer cannot create an object of type weapon, essentially. So if we go back to our main, we cannot do weapon w1 equals new weapon. Because if we do this, Java will give us an error. So let's just try this. I'm going to comment out everything else. So essentially what I want to do is create a weapon object, but if we take a look at our actual weapon class, it's abstract. I'm just going to go to CPSC 233. So here we have our classes. I'm going to compile my sword.java. And here we get the error itself saying weapon is abstract, cannot be instantiated. So what this is doing is it's forcing us to create an object which is a more concrete version of a weapon. So we can do something like this that we already did. Sword s1 equals new sword. And we know that sword extends weapon, as we see up here. So we can do this, and I'm just going to show this by compiling our sword class, and it compiles just fine. And David, yes, great comment there. Yes, a weapon cannot be instantiated, but it can be referenced. What that means here is, let's say I care about having a weapon, but I don't practically care about what kind of weapon it is. I just want the abilities that a weapon can have, but not the specific things. So we can say weapon, give it a variable name, you know, W1, S1, or hopefully we want better variable names than this. So I'm just going to call it, let's say, weapon here. But when we instantiate, we give it a concrete class. So when you do new, we want something here that is concrete, meaning it's not abstract. So in this case, we have a sword. Another thing we did was a weapon, or the next weapon equals new staff. This was also what we created in our midterm 2 review. So if I go back here, we have a class staff.java, and once again, it also extends weapon. So this is a different kind of weapon. A sword behaves differently than a staff, but since they're both weapons, they can do similar things, meaning they can do an attack. What else can staff or weapons do? See, they have some kind of damage value. They have a name. They can, you know, do the get damage. You can obtain whatever their damage value is. You can get whatever their name is. And each weapon has a do damage method. However, this method itself is abstract. Now what we're saying here is every class that extends a weapon, it must implement this method. But the methods may behave differently. And going back to our example here, our staff here, when you do the do damage method on your staff, it says you shall not pass. But if we look at the do damage method, let's see, where did it go? Right here. If we do our do damage method on our sword, it says Frostmourne hungers. So the signature for both of these methods is exactly the same. Public void do dmg, no arguments. In sword, public void do damage, no arguments in staff, and it matches whatever's provided here. Public, in this case it's abstract, but our concrete methods are not abstract, so we avoid this word there. But void do damage, no arguments. So these are the capabilities of an abstract class. Okay. Do we have any questions regarding abstract classes? Okay, so we have a question from Real Cheese. Can you provide implementation for do damage inside weapon. Okay. So inside the weapon class, we can have methods that are available to our child classes as well. So if I say, if this wasn't an abstract method, and I could actually provide it some kind of body, let's say we can do it this way as well. Now what's going to happen is, let's say if our child class does not have this method. So let's say our staff class does not have this do damage method. It's going to use the method from our weapon class, assuming if we have a staff object. But if the method is in our child class, so let's say if we did implement this method in our child class, then we would be using the method in our child class. So to see an example of this, you know what, I am going to take this out. Okay, but our sword class has a do damage method with the same signature, public void do damage. What this is doing is it's overloading the method, or rather overriding the method. Sorry, we have to use correct terminology here. We are overriding the method which is in weapon.java. So if we do this, so we have weapon of type sword, and then next weapon of type staff. If we do weapon.doDamage and next weapon.doDamage. So we're calling the do damage method for both of these weapons. The first one is a sword, the second one is a staff. Let's say we compile again and we run it. So what happens here, when we run weapon.doDamage, our weapon, although it's a weapon type reference, we have internally it's stored as a sword. So it calls the do damage method in our sword class because it overrides the method in our weapon class. So it prints Frostmourne Hungers, which we see here. But when we have our staff object, so next weapon, which is a staff, we know that the staff does not override the do damage method because it's commented out. It calls the method in the parent class, which is in the weapon class, it just prints do weapon damage, which is what we see here. So you can have the method being declared in your parent class and then overriding them in your children class. What you cannot do is something like this. You cannot declare a method abstract and give it a body. I think this would give you an error. Yeah. So it says abstract methods cannot have a body. If it's abstract, then it doesn't have a body, meaning it's just like this. If it's not abstract, then the method has a body. Okay. If a method is abstract, does it have to be in every class that extends the base class? Great question. So let's try something interesting. So let's say if our staff is also abstract. So we have a parent abstract class, which is weapon. We have our staff class, which is also abstract. And we don't put it in here. We don't put the do damage method in here. But let's say we create a new one. Public class, I'm just going to call it nStaff. I'm just making up a name here, which extends staff, but this one is the concrete class. and this is just going to call the super constructor. What we need to do is to have the method implemented somewhere in the chain. So if you can see, this is a chain which starts from weapon, it goes to staff, and then it goes to end staff. I'm just going to save this file as well. So we need to have this method, which is do damage. It needs to be instantiated somewhere along that line. It could be either here, meaning it wouldn't be abstract in the first place then, or it could be here in the staff class, or it could be in our next staff class, or the new staff class. So it must be somewhere. So let's say if we have it, I'm just going to delete this. If you do something like this, so the method is implemented down here, but it's not implemented here. So let's actually try creating an instance of this. And taking a look at see what happens. Okay, compiles good. And it runs the method you shall not pass, which we know is down here. Or we could have it so that I'm going to copy this here. So let's say if the staff class didn't implement this method, but our end staff did. And I'm going to change the message here to just hello world. Compile it again. Run it. And so the method in our most concrete class gets called, and there's no problem with compiling or running. And what we see here is, although we have this public abstract void do damage, the immediate class that extends our weapon class, in this case staff, does not implement the method. The class which is next in line from that, so if you're having a chain from weapon to staff to end staff, that's the one that implements the method. So we need the method implemented somewhere along that line. We don't necessarily care where. It might depend on what your project is and how your design is going, but syntax wise, we don't care where it is. It just needs to be somewhere along that line. Okay. So hopefully that clarified that question from Jack Dude. What would happen if the staff is made the do damage method in weapon abstract? Rap, could you please clarify what you mean by that? What would happen if the staff, if you made the do damage method in weapon abstract? Do abstract method always have no parameters? That is not true. Abstract methods can have as many parameters as you need. They're just like any other methods which don't have a body. So they can have multiple parameters or a single parameter, or they can have no parameters. There are no restrictions on parameters here. If both staff and end staff had the abstract method, what would happen last? Okay, so if both of these class have the method in them, so let's see what would happen. So we have our end staff right here. Compile. And so we see hello world instead of you shall not pass. This is because the reference here we have is of type weapon, but internally it's an end staff. So that's why the most concrete method implementation gets called. We say that end staff is more concrete than staff, which is more concrete than weapon. So once again, the bottommost, the concrete most method gets called. Okay. Which is given highest preference. What's the point of parameters if they can't have a body? Where do they go? Okay. Okay. Let's see. David, what do you mean by which is given highest preference? The point of parameters is that, so let's say I need a parameter here, call it x for argument's sake. Now when I implement the method in my child classes, it also needs that parameter, which means that I need to use this integer to do something. Just like any other method, when you need parameters, you're probably using it for the method body. That's why if you have parameter specified here, then when you actually implement the method, you need the parameter there as well. So this is forcing your child method, or you're forcing the implementation to use that parameter. Okay. Yes, Jim. This is for an actual university class. We are doing a final exam review. What would happen if neither of them had the? Okay. So wrap once again. What would happen if neither of them had the do damage method? So if do you mean if neither of the staff and end staff had the do damage method, then we would get an error while compiling saying that this method is an abstract method in our parent class, which is not instantiated or implemented in our child classes. So let me just show right here. So neither of these classes have the do damage method. I'm going to go try and compile, which gives me end staff is not abstract, does not override the abstract method do damage. Okay. So I'm going to just go down to wish here. Overridden by the exact number of parameters in the parent class. Yes, so it's, no, we don't look at it as the exact number of methods, but we look at it as the signature. So when we specify, so let's say int x, string y, boolean z, this is a signature of a method, of this particular method called do damage. The signature has to match when you actually implement it, which means that it includes having the correct arguments in the correct order as well. So the first argument has to be the integer, second one has to be a string, third one has to be a boolean. But in our simplified example, we don't have parameters. Yes, so your matching signature is correct. Okay, well, I'm glad we could be helpful for you, Jimp. Okay. Have I answered all questions regarding abstract classes? Do we have any other questions? Would it be a compile error or a runtime error if the signature does not match? It would be a compile time error if the signatures don't match. Because I can show you right here. So it'll give us the same thing we saw just here. Compile again. Let's see. Where was my? Yeah, so it says sort is not abstract, and it does not override the method do damage with an int parameter. So it won't even let us compile if the signatures don't match, or rather if we're not doing the overriding properly. A runtime error is the code does compile properly, but when you're running it, something crashes and it prints a error message on your screen, and the program crashes. But it does run until it reaches the crash condition. Okay. Should I move on to interfaces? And I guess I also should have asked earlier, is the volume issue okay today? I recall last time people were saying I had I had an issue with my noise gate. I turned it off this time. I think I did. Yeah, Scophy, recursion is kind of later on. I need to go in order as unless people have specific requests. We need to jump to recursion right away. If that's what the majority votes, I'll jump to it. But I should do interfaces first. Okay. So an interface is, let's see how I would say it. Now this may not be the exact definition provided in textbooks. This is my own understanding or how I use it. An interface is a contract between entities. It's either a contract between yourself, or multiple people, which specifies the behavior of a certain class. So we start by like public interface, let's just say weapon interface. Now what an interface does, it only contains method signatures, or rather it only contains abstract methods. And what that does is anyone who uses these interface is forced to implement the correct methods. So meaning, let's say if we have a group project going on, which we did in this course, I'm in charge of creating this weapon class. Someone else is in charge of creating the character classes and the whole world classes. But what we do need to agree on initially is how are these classes going to interact. I may have some methods in my weapon class that someone else needs to call, and they need to know beforehand what's going to be the signature of that method. What is it going to be? What is the method going to be called? What are the arguments provided? What is the return type? They need to know all that information without knowing the details. It's like so what you're discussing is, okay, this is what you're doing. I don't care about how you do it, but it has to match this signature. So it would be something like, let's say, let's do one of our methods here. So it would be public void so this would be something like anyone who is implementing a weapon and using the weapon interface, we know that we want to have this method called do damage. We don't have any other details about the weapon class so far. All we know is that it has a method of type called do damage. It has no parentheses and it has no return value. It's void. Okay. It could be another method, public abstract Boolean equip, and let's say character C. So without knowing anything else about the weapon, we know that it's going to have another method called equip. It's going to take a character as an argument, and it's going to return a Boolean as its return value. Now you can use documentation here to specify what this method is going to actually do and how it's going to do it. So let's say equips this weapon to the input character. Then we do at param_c, the target character, at return if So here what we've done is just we've kind of discussed of what this method is going to do. The general idea is it's going to equip the given this weapon, which is our current class, to the input character that's provided as argument. Our argument is C, the target character, and is going to return true if the equip was successful. Otherwise, it's going to return false. Now notice we don't know the details about what's going on in the weapon class. We don't know the details about what's going on in the character class. We don't even know the details of what's going on in this method. We just have the general idea. And that's the purpose of the interface. It makes things much easier to discuss with multiple group members. Even if you're working by yourself in a project and you're working on several classes, you may be working on one class today, another class tomorrow, a third class 3 weeks from now. You might not be able to remember every little detail that you thought of. That's why you have interfaces to know that how are these classes going to interact with each other. Okay. Okay, so sound is okay. Can you specify class or instance variables in an interface? I don't think you can specify instance variables in an interface. At least I normally don't. I'm just gonna, but we can always try it. So let's see that we have weapon class, implements weapon interface. So one thing to notice is when we do inheritance, when we do extends, we can only extend a single class. But when we do implement, rather interfaces, we use the keyword implements instead of extends, and we can implement multiple interfaces as well. So like if we have two, I'll give whatever the next one is, and just comma separated. Okay, so right now it's going to give me an error because this interface has this other method, equip, which I have not implemented here. But let's try it anyways. Okay. Okay, so weapon interface, do I have a typo? I did need to fix this. That's an error from before. Let's see. Cannot find symbol. Weapon interface. Why is that the case? What am I missing here? Oh, I do. Wow, good catch. Thank you. I had a typo in the file name. Okay. So that was a completely unrelated error. So we compile. Okay, so we're saying that the concrete class sword does not override the abstract method equip. Nstav doesn't override the method equip. So we're getting the same issues as we had when we didn't implement the abstract methods. And that's because our weapon class implements this interface. So, once we have this do damage method in our interface, we don't even need it down here anymore. Because it's required by the interface itself. Meaning that this weapon class doesn't necessarily need to implement these two methods, but somewhere along the line to our concrete classes, our non-abstract classes, that method should be implemented somewhere. And depending on your project, depending on your design, it may be implemented in the concrete most classes, or it could be implemented somewhere higher up in the hierarchy. So one thing we also wanted to test was, can we have instance variables in interfaces? Private int some var. Okay. Okay, so we can't have variables, and it says modifier private is not allowed. So let's do give it some value, and we don't assign it private. And we also need to include the equip button method. Public boolean equip. We don't really have a character class, so I'm just going to change this method here to no arguments instead of actually creating the class, because these are just simple examples. And this is all that's going to return true. Once again, this is for an example. This is not an actual working class part of a project. These are just very basic examples that I'm working with. Let's compile it again. And I'm just going to type it. Okay, so it does work. We do have a variable here, but it has to be assigned a value. So if I don't assign it a value, I think it's going to give me an error like it did last time. There we go. So we need to assign it some value, and I don't think it can be public. Oh, sorry, the private. So modifier private is not allowed here. Another thing we can do is, let's see if we can go to our class. Let's go down here, or rather, down here is better. What I'm seeing here is, it can be modify this variable value. So initially it's 5. Can we change it from our child class and then use it as a value? Use it in printing. Okay. So it says we cannot assign a value to a final variable some var. So we cannot change it. Can we use it though? We can. So what we've kind of learned here, and I would highly recommend, verifying this with through a textbook or some proper means, because I'm just doing this by experimentation, is that we have a constant here. That's my assumption based on what I've seen here. We can't have instance variables, but we can have constants, which you assign it a value right away and you cannot change it. Yeah. So wish. So we do have public. I didn't declare it static or final, but it's going to behave as a final, because we can't, as we saw, we can't change it. And David, thank you for clarifying this. Yep, constants work in an interface. You guys did it for your project. Great. Okay. Should we move on to next topic, or did we want to jump to recursion, privacy leaks, exceptions? Any requests? Okay. Okay, so file IO. Okay, so I guess we'll just go down the list. File IO. Let's start it here. Let's go back to, where's Notepad? I'm gonna create a new class here. So public class file IO example. File IO is generally reading and writing to files, input, output. So let's try, reading from a file first. I'm just going to do file IO example.java. Okay. Let's say we have, what do we need in order to read from a file? Let me just pull up my notes here because I haven't done this in a while. Keep messing up. Okay. So normally I like using a scanner. Declare it null. We also need to import it. And now we need to initialize the scanner in a try-catch block. Okay, so we do scan equals new scanner, new file input stream, and we give it the file name. I'm going to call it file.txt. Now notice we don't have this file yet. We will have to create it. Okay, so if we can do this, otherwise we catch an exception. File not found exception E. Okay. So what we're doing is we want to initialize the scanner object with this file name. And if the file doesn't exist, or we catch a file not found exception, we print the message file not found, and we exit our program, or we return from our main. Okay. And now we want to keep, depending on what you want to do when you're reading a file. In our case, let's say we want to keep reading every line from his file. We do while scan dot has next. A list of the methods that are available to our scanner can be provided by the Java API. So let's take a look at that. So Java 8 API. Google is our friend. So these are all the classes provided by Java, by the Java library. Alphabetically sorted. There's a lot of them, so let's see if I can find scanner. There it is. And now this describes what a scanner does, how it behaves, and all the methods associated with it. And what we want to do is we want to keep looping until we find as long as it has more lines to read. Okay, so we have a question here from David. Can it just be new scanner, new file, and then file name? So let's take a look if it can. So we take a look at the scanner constructors, and possibly. So instead of doing new file input stream, let's say new file, as long as the file is initialized correctly. String path name, yeah. Okay, I'm gonna import this, so java.io.file. Okay, so first let's see if it works. We need to create our file.txt. I'm gonna give it some random strings. Okay, so let's try it. Oh, we didn't import our file not found exception. And here it just reads every single line in the file. So what's the difference between doing new file or new file input stream? So I believe this is how internally Java would read the file. So if you take a look at just the file class, you have it right here. If you're interested, you can read this whole to define to see how this object behaves. But if you do input stream, it might behave a bit differently. The end result to us is essentially the same, but there might be internal differences as Java is working with these two different objects. It might read at a different rate. It might store things a bit differently. But that would depend on the internal implementation, which I'm not aware of. And that's kind of like the point here, because I don't really care about the details. These pretty nitty-gritty details. What I care about is, getting the right results. And they're different, like you don't always have to use the scanner. I believe there's a buffered reader. There's different classes that do reading for you. It's how you use it, what kind of side effects it has, what kind of memory it uses, because once you get into bigger programs, memory might become an issue. So if you're reading huge, large files, one reader might be more appropriate than another because it uses less memory. That could be a possible reasoning for these differences. At our level, we don't really care about these differences because they're too fine detailed and they don't affect our small projects at this point. Okay, so Captain V Fantasy. I have not discussed recursion yet. That's the second last topic in today's review. What does has next do? This is a question for our rep gang. So has next, it says returns true if this scanner has another token in its input. A token is what you would call a word. So you know, a string, not necessarily. So these different tokens could be divided differently. So let's say, you know, different words are divided by different spaces. Right? So if you take a look here, this is going to be a token because it's separated from this white space here. And then this is another token because this is a 5-letter string combined all together. This is going to be one token because, you know, they're all combined together. But since there's a new line character, you know, because we're jumping from line 1 to line 2 here, this is another token. So these white spaces are default tokens. I believe you can change them so that special characters can become different tokens. So let's say if you use the symbol for comma to be a divider, so you can say like D, E, or you know, something like this. Now this divides up your tokens. So this is one, D itself, E is another, then there's divided by the comma symbol, then F, then G, and so on. Now there's a different versions of has next. So there's just a has next. There's a has next pattern, which I'm not too familiar with. I don't really use this. But you know, we have has next string. So it checks, does it have another string? Has next big decimal. So it may have the file may have, you know, more string to it or more content, but does it have a next big decimal? Does it have a big integer? Checking here. Is there a Boolean value? Is there a next Boolean value? Is there a byte, float, double, int? So these specific has next methods check for these specific conditions. So long, short, etc. Okay, so solo, how much the written is worth for the final? I'm not too sure. Sorry, I haven't seen the final. I haven't seen how it's divided up or what the format is. I'm assuming it's going to follow the similar format as our midterms. It's probably a bit longer because I don't think it's only 50 minutes. I think it's longer than 50 minutes. So I think I would just scale appropriately. And we're getting followers. Awesome. Thank you. Appreciate it. Do those throw errors or just skip the type they don't take? So do you do has next comma? Okay. So we can check here. So these just return true or false. So let's say we do has next int. It doesn't say it throws any exceptions, or rather it throws illegal state exception if the scanner is closed. But if it doesn't have this type of token, so if it doesn't have an int, it's just going to return false. And wrapping, if you do, you know, has next string comma, then it'll return true if there is the symbol in your stream or your input stream. If it doesn't, it returns false. But do an int count for has long int. Okay, so we can actually try that. So let's see, while rather int counter equals 0, has next long, okay, so let's try it this way. We know that there's at least one numeric token here, 225, on a single line by itself. Let's see what our result is going to be. Oh. Okay, so it says 0 because probably it doesn't recognize it as a long. But if we change it to an int, and says 0 here as well. That is an interesting behavior because I thought it would have at least one thing here. So let's try removing everything else and try running it now. And of course it runs into an infinite loop. That's because it sees a next int and it just keeps the cursor back here and it continuously loops over and over again. So you can do scan.nextInt to read the next integer value and move the cursor along. So here we go, we get one integer value, which we see here. So let's separate it. Now we have two integer values because this is a single integer, a single token. We have a white space, which acts as a delimiter, or breaks things apart. And then this is our next int token. And in all this, I forgot to do scan.close. So this is essentially our file I part. So input, we're reading from the file. Writing to a file doesn't necessarily have to be that much different. I'm just gonna comment that out there. So we're going to create a print writer. Can you add text in the ints between and rerun? Okay. So before we do this, okay, so we added a text in the middle here, and now we're going to run. We don't really need to compile again because we didn't change the code. All we're doing is changing the input file, which is read at runtime. So we don't need to compile the code. And it returns 1. Because it sees, has next int. Yes, it does. So it reads it at scan.nextInt. And then it gets the cursor here, or perhaps here. I believe it's here. And then it sees, is the next one an int? This one is not an int, so the loop ends, and that's why we get print 1. We can clarify this with the description in the API. It returns true if the next token in the scanner can be interpreted as an int value. So it takes a look at the next token and see, is it an int? Okay. Do we have any other question about reading? I don't think Dr. Raval is going to give you trick questions. Don't quote me on that. I'm not exactly sure. I haven't seen the midterm. But I don't think the point of the final exam is to put really fine, detailed, tricky stuff in there. And a 0 that looks like an O and you can't tell apart. Or rather, I like hearing this binging sound. It's kind of awesome. Okay, going back to this, so we want to do so Jim, my ID, I usually use Eclipse. I'm using Notepad++ for now because it makes things much easier to see at this point, and we're not working with complicated code. And it's much more like when you're writing a final exam on paper, you have to take a look at these details yourself, and IDE isn't going to help you there. So we need to import java.io.printviter. File output stream. So once again, we initialize. What's wrong with Eclipse? It's worked fine for me so far. We have to put our printviter in a try catch. So we write pw equals new file, or rather new printviter. File output stream. Call it file2.txt. Okay, so we have a great question from Solom11. Why not just import io.star? So why not just, instead of having 4 of these, just have Java or import java.io.star. So this is something, I guess it's a personal preference, or depending on what your project does, but what this does, it imports everything in the package, which obviously we don't need everything in java.io. So if we actually look at java.io, there's a lot of classes here. Obviously, we don't need all of them. So I personally like to know which classes I'm importing, and if there is, some error, or the compile time or runtime error, I have much more control over what's going on. We don't want things, being magically imported just because I used the star operator. Okay, can we write pw instead of? Okay, so this is another good question. I think I saw something from before. Okay, something about being docked marks. By Jack, dude, will you get docked marks if you import everything? I don't think you will be docked marked for importing everything. I would verify, if you're worried about that, verify that with the instructor, or if it's during the exam, one of the TAs that's there. But I think that should be okay. We're not that strict on the import statements. Okay, and then can you do just printviter this way instead of doing equals null? Unfortunately, this gives an issue, because let's say in our case here, so let's complete this try block with the catch. Okay, so what's going to happen is, if I do it this way, so printviter pw, and then I try to initialize it in the catch block, what happens if the exception is caught here, or rather thrown here, and then caught here, but I don't have this return statement. Java is going to try to move on to the rest of the code, and PW has not been initialized yet. It hasn't been assigned a value. It's just a reference, essentially. So it's going to give me a compilation error. I believe it's a compilation error. Let's try it. Oh, that's a different error. More of a typo. Not what we were looking for. So it gives us this. The variable PW might not have been initialized. So the reason I do null is to initialize this value, or rather this variable. So let's try this again. And now if we can go and look for the file2.txt, we have the string hello world. I used Notepad until I think it was until my second year of university. Not even Notepad++, just very basic Notepad. So, personal preference. Okay, let's see. Okay, so try to catch up and do what's going on in the chat. Okay, set it to null unless you don't declare outside the catch block. So importing something like file.io.star, that might be okay, but don't do. I don't think that'll work anyways. Yeah. Or even, I hope this doesn't work, because that's terrifying. It works, but don't do this. Once again, do not do this. This one is okay, because at least you know that you're going toward the IO classes. If you don't recall what the package is called, try to come up with a logical name for it. And then, so let's say if I don't know what it's called IO, I just know it's something to do with input output. So Java input output dot star, and then as a comment I can say trying to import from the IO package. So try to do this kind of thing instead if you don't know what it's actually called. And good point there, Jim. Classes have the same name, and that could turn into a nightmare. So if the file does exist, print PW would work. As we saw, RapGang, it would not work. It'll give us a compilation error. So even if the file exists, we won't be able to compile the program, because they'll say, hasn't been initialized, or might not have been initialized. How do you prevent overwriting over an existing file? So overwriting an existing file, there's one thing you could do is, so if we go in our file writer, or rather print writer, so here we have, take a look at print writer, or rather output stream. Okay, constructors. I might be chasing a long extending line here, but I believe if you do this. You go to name. So let's say if we give it a Boolean true, what it does, it appends to it. But if we don't give it a Boolean, so I should have mentioned that file2 was already existing. We already ran it once, so it said hello world. And now that we ran it again, while changing the parameters there, providing it a true, it appended to the file or concatenated it. If we either don't give it a variable or a Boolean here, I believe what this will do is overwrite the file. So we want to reload it, and it just overrode what was originally there. To be really clear, let's change the message. Compile, run it, and we reload the file. That's really odd. What am I missing? Oh, right. It was correct. Cancel. I want to get rid of this. So if we look at the file right now, so this is file2.txt, it says hello world, change the message. If we run it now, it's going to overwrite what's there to just change the message. Yes, Shutterfly, you need the PW equals null, otherwise you get the may not have been initialized. Okay, ambiguity issues is the biggest reason I've found also. That sounds about right, Jim. Thank you for the help there. One thing we also want to keep in mind, anytime you open up a scanner or input stream, you want to close it. Same thing with a print writer or an output stream. You also want to close that one as well. So another question was, can we do something like this? File writer. Going to change the message all the way completely, so let's try to compile. Okay, so if you're using a file writer, the IO exception must also be caught. I'm just going to copy this message here and just print out. So if we used the file output stream, it only gave us the file not found exception. But if we use file writer, it's giving us file IO exception as well. Importing, obviously. And a whole bunch of new things. All right, what am I missing here? Unreported exception. Thought I caught that. Oh, here we go. Cannot find symbol, file IO exception. What am I missing here? Or is it just called an IO exception instead of a file IO exception? Okay. File not found has already been caught. So I believe this is going into our hierarchy. So one important thing about exceptions is the exception hierarchy. So if we take a look at IO exception, it is probably more generic than file not found exception. So let's see. IO exception. There we go. All known subclasses. So this up here, we want to have more specific exceptions. So once again, if we take a look at our extension hierarchy, when we want to have the most specific ones, so in this case, let's say end staff. If this was an exception, we would want to have it at the top, followed by the less concrete version. So it would be staff followed by the most general version, which is weapon. So according to the API, we know that file not found exception is a subclass of IO exception. So our code reflects that by having file not found exception up here and an IO exception out here. This is important because depending on what are you programming, what your project is, you might have different error messages being printed here based on the exception. The more specific exception you catch, the more specific error you can provide. The more general you catch, the less specific you can provide. So we have this compiled. And if you take a look at now, it works still. So instead of doing a file output stream, we have a file writer. And once again, internally, Java is doing things differently. But at this level, I only care about the results. And looking from the outside, they both behave similar to me. I can provide them an input using a print writer, and they write it to this to the file. If I provide nothing here or false, it overwrites the file. If I provide comma true, it concatenates to the file. And from my perspective, that is, once again, that's what I care about. Does that cover file I/O for us? Do we have any specific questions regarding file I/O? Is this thing still on? Okay. I was afraid there for a second that my internet had cut out. Okay. So if we don't have any more questions on file I/O, and I believe we've also just covered exceptions as well. Did anyone have any questions about exceptions? Okay. Take that nope as a group nope. Unless someone is frantically typing right now. But if not, we can move on to privacy leaks. And let's see if we have the example from last time. I don't think we do. No, we don't. Let's see, sword. Oh, we do have our shape and location. Okay. So I'm gonna close all to the left. Do we need to know all exceptions? I don't think you need to know all exceptions. You need to know general idea of exceptions and things that we have worked with. So probably the IO exception, file not found exception, null pointer exception, array index out of bounds exception, possibly illegal argument exception. Okay, so I do have a question. What's the difference between throwing an exception at the start of a method and stating it in a catch try? That's actually a good question. So let's open up the file IO example again. So if I do things as I'm doing right now, I'm saying that this class is going to catch any exceptions that it receives, and it's going to handle it itself. But let's say I don't really care about what kind of exception is thrown to me. I just want the other person or the caller method to take care of it. So throws, I just say general exception. Okay. So this one is that this method doesn't necessarily take care of the exceptions itself. So instead of putting everything here in a try catch, I should have just used /star. So instead of putting things in a try catch, what's going to happen is anytime there's an exception thrown, this method is going to just pass it along to whoever called it. One of my students says, "Bless you."
Oh, thank you.
So if we try this here, so here, as you notice, even the parts which require an exception, where did it go? Although we have commented it out, we don't get any compilation errors. Meaning anytime an exception is thrown, it's just going to get passed on to whatever method called this method. Or if we want to handle things more appropriately, so let's say, for our, when we're reading a file, instead of printing the file not found and returning, we want to throw an exception. So let's see, how do we throw an exception? This is something I'm going to have to look up as well, because I haven't done this in a long time. Okay. So what it said. Okay, so what's going to happen here is we have a scanner. It's going to try to open up this file, which does not exist in our folder, so I can show you right here. It has a weird name, file SADADSAE. It doesn't exist here. So this is going to call a file not found exception. which in turn is going to throw this our own custom exception. So let's try and compile and run, and it says Zan's file not found exception. So I didn't care what the original exception was. I could have created my own exception class and provided its own method here. So I did use file not found exception. I can even array index out of bounds exception, and I need to figure out where does that exception exist. Need to import this. So I'm catching a file not found exception, and for some reason I'm throwing out array index out of bound exception. Logically it doesn't make sense. I'm just doing it for the sake of an example. So we compile, we run, and now instead of a file not found exception, we actually have an array index out of bound exception with my nifty message. And this is where it's saying like where it happened. Line 17 of file ioexample.java, which is right here. So here we're throwing our own personal exception. But in order for us to be able to throw this exception, we need to tell the method that it does throw. So let's say if we take this out, we can't throw it anymore because the method doesn't say it throws an exception. So we need not necessarily this exception, we need to actually specify which. We don't necessarily need to be generic. We can be more concrete by specifying the exception type. And that's because it's doing this thing here. So once again, we get the array index out of bounds, Zan's file not found exception, which is this thing here. Okay. Any other questions regarding exceptions? If not, I can move on to privacy leaks. And then finally we have recursion, and then back to polymorphism. Okay. Whoops. New slide. So for working with privacy leaks, we have these classes ourselves. I'm going to erase all this because we have no idea what's going on there. We have a class called location, or rather a class called shape, which has the location object, or rather it's better to do the class location first. We have a class called location, which has two integers, instance variables x and y, a constructor that sets x and y, and then getters and a method for set x. So real cheese, I'm going to come back to exceptions after we've covered all these topics. We are a little behind time because it is 8 o'clock. Okay. So if we do a very basic version of our shape class, don't necessarily need that. Yeah, so the shape class, the constructor gets a location object, assigns the instance variable to whatever the location object is. When it does a getter for the location, it just returns lock. Okay. So let's say if I do location L1 equals new location and give it an XY values, let's say 5 and 6, and I do shape S1 equals new shape and provided L1 as an argument. But now let's say if I want to change the object L1, so I do L1 dot set x to 100. Double check that's what the method was called. Set x, yep. You can do system.out.println S1. S2. So I created a new location object, I created a shape object passing in the location object L1. I print what S1 is. I change the value in L1. And then I print what S1 is again. And what's going to happen is, so I'm going to see javac shape.java. Oh, sorry. S1. So we see that the value for x in S1 changes as well, which is what we don't want, because S1 is an object on its own, and if we don't, even though we change L1, we don't want S1 to change. And this is causing a privacy leak. What's happening internally is, let's see if I can draw this here. Let's see, insert, I want shapes. Okay. So this is, let's say, my object L1, where x equals 5, y equals 6. Once again, insert shape. I'm going to do a circle. So this is my shape. If I learn how to spell shape again. So once we have this, there used to be a nice menu here that I could pull up and then do all sorts of stuff. I can't do it. Can I do arrows anymore? That's not what I want. Alright, we're going to do it this way. So if I have the shape which has an L1, it's pointing to this object because that's what I pass it in memory. Now when I do shape dot print x and print y, so rather when I do this toString method, log.getx, log.getY, it prints 5 and 6, as we see up here, 5 and 6. Now when I do L1.setX, what's it doing here is it's going to change this value to 100. But this shape is still pointing to this object. So when I print the shape object again, I get the x value as 100. But I wanted it to remain to 5. So instead of actually assigning the object L1 to S, I actually needed to make a copy of it. Make a copy here and assign it to this one. So initially this was 5. I'm going to copy this one to 5 as well. So this was a copy of this. Now when I change, so this will be shape.location. But now when I change L1, it does not change anything for this internal instance variable. So to reflect this in our code, when we do here, so it would be new location xy. Now if we compile again, what did I mistake? Location. Did I make a mistake here? Taking a look. What did I screw up? It was working just fine before. Oh, okay. That's what I needed. Okay, so when actually, as for the constructor, when I get the location object LOC as an argument, instead of assigning it directly, meaning instead of doing this pointer up here, I'm going to create a new object of type location, and I'm just going to copy the x value and the y value. So copying the x value and copying the y value. Yes, David, thank you. So that's what it was. I needed to get x and get y here. So now when I actually change L1.setX, it only changes it up here, and this down here remains what it originally was, which is 5. So let's try it again. So compile. And so it remains the same. Now there's another issue with privacy leaking here. So let's say we do location L2 equals s1.getLock. And then we do L2.setX to 200. And we print our S1 again. Compile, run, and now S1 is being changed to 206 instead of remaining 5 and 6. And what's happening here is when I do L2 equals S1.getLock, I just return the object as is. Meaning, if we go back here, so I create another reference. I'm going to do insert shape, make it a triangle. Call this L2. Line. So it says again, pointing to the same one. Now when I do L2.setX to 200, it's changing this one to 200 again, which is once again not something we want. We want it to be an object on its own. So we want to keep this at 5. What we want to do is create a copy of this and have L2 point to this one. I have L1 still pointing to this original one, shape is pointing to this internal one, and L2 is pointing to this third one. And now when we do L2.setX to 200, it does not affect the instance variable of shape. So to reflect this in the code, instead of returning location as is, we do new location and log.getX, log.getY. So we return a copy of our instance variable. Now, even though we do L2.setX to 200, it does not affect our S1. Compile, run, and once again we get 5 and 6. And that is very basic overview of privacy leaking. In some cases, you do want the original object to be returned. You know, so in a case where you have some kind of battle system between two characters, one character attacks another character, you need their health to be modified. So in that case, you do need the original object being passed. If you make a copy of the object and pass that object along as a parameter, and you change that object's HP, it's not going to affect your original object. So you need to know when you need to prevent this from happening, or when it's okay to pass in the original objects. And once again, that depends on your project, on what you're working with, including your design. Do we have any other questions regarding privacy? Or rather, privacy leaks? Okay, if not, then I'm going to move on finally to recursion. Woohoo. Okay, so recursion is it's a programming paradigm where you have certain methods which call themselves, rather they recurse. So let's create another class, public class, recursion example, and public static void main. Okay. So the way this would work is we have methods that keep calling itself until it reaches some kind of termination condition, and then propagates the result back to the original caller. So we'll start off with something very similar, or rather very simple. It's a method that counts up from 1 to n, whatever n may be. Okay, so let's take a look here. So public int count up. So here we're going to say int start num and int end num. So count from start num to end num, whatever that may be. If start num is 1, end num is 100, it's going to count 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 plus 5 all the way up to 100, or rather it should be called sum up instead of count up. Okay, so what we want to check is if the start num is equal to our end num. That should be an n. So first thing we're doing is we are looking for our base case or our terminating condition. Our terminating condition is if the start num is reached the final num, or rather the end num. In that case, we return the value for our terminating condition, which would be return. We can do start num or we can do end num because they are equal values. So this is our base case. That's the first thing we check. And usually it's followed by, it includes a return statement if the end condition has been met. If we haven't met our end condition, we need to shrink our search space, or rather the space that the input represents. Let's say if it's an array, we probably want to get down to the smaller array size, so decrease the array size. If it's some numeric range, we want to decrease that range. If it's a string, we want to keep reading along the string, depending on what the input is. So in our case, it's an integer range. To reach a base case, we need to decrease that range. So the way we do this is int new start num, or rather our next start num would be our current start num plus 1. So just to clarify a few things we've discussed, so sums up start num plus all the way up to end num. So start num is the starting number. Is the end or final number. At return, start num plus whatever's in the middle plus end num. And in this case, we also have a precondition, which is start num is less than or equal to end num. So this is what we are assuming. So at each iteration, we want to check for the base case first. If we haven't reached the base case, then we decrease our range and call the method again. Whoops. So we have our new start num, which is just incrementing start num by 1. And now then we can get the sum. So int sum equals sum up. New start num, and our end condition, or rather our end num, stays the same. We haven't changed anything here. And now we want to return, or rather sum plus start num. So we have, I believe, 4 different steps here. First one, check the base condition. It's also called the terminating condition, end condition, final condition, depending on the terminology, but the idea is this is your end case. This is your termination case. If you've reached your termination case, you return whatever your base case value is. If it's not the case, if it's not the termination case, you want to decrease your range or your input space so that you're getting closer to the terminating condition. So in our case, we keep incrementing start num by 1. Eventually, start num will equal to end num, and therefore this will be met. So we decrease the case or our range. We do the actual recursion, and we get its value, and then we actually use the value itself, which is in our case we get the sum from the end condition, or rather our recursion, and then we add it to whatever our start num was. Okay, so I'm going to show this as an example. So that would be recursion example RE equals new So for simplicity, let's sum up 1 to 5. And that gives us 15. Right? 5 plus 4, or rather 1 plus 2 is 3, 3 plus 3 is 6, 6 plus 4 is 10, 10 plus 5 is 15. we can make it more crazy. Give me a number 1 to 100. And sums up to 50/50. Okay, so Rap Gang, that's a great question. A rough trace of what's going on here. So I'm going to give you a rough trace on 1 to 5 instead of 1 to 100 because I don't have enough time for that. So just gonna add it here, or rather outside the class. So we have a call to our main method. So this is something that gets started. Then we have the RE constructor, or the recursion example constructor. Which in turn calls the default object constructor. Hello, I live on Earth. I live on the Earth. I live here too. So getting back to here, once we have a recursion example going on, now we actually get into this line. So we have the SumUp method, or this should be actually one line in because our main method calls this. So we call SumUp with 5 and 1, rather 1 and 5. And now this in turn, so this is going to check the base case. Well, this is not true. It's going to shrink our range, so start num is going to be start num plus 1, and then this is going to call sum up to 2 and 5, which, same thing is going to keep follow again. That's going to call sum up with 3 and 5. Just going to copy this line because once again, same thing is going to happen with 4 and 5. Which finally will end up with 5 and 5. So what's going to happen now is our basis case is finally met. So this means it'll return 5. So this returns 5. Which means we go back to this call. So when it was here, it got the value 5. And now this is going to return sum and start num. So this is 5, we know because we just got it from up here. And start num is 4, because that's what it had. So this is going to return 5 plus 4, which is actually equal to 9. And now it's going to return to this particular call where start num was 3. So we know that the sum here is equal to 9 and start num is equal to 3. So this is going to return 9 plus 3, which is 12. And this is going to return to this particular call right here. We know that sum is 12, that's being passed, and start num is 2, so this is going to return 12 plus 2, 14, which finally returns to our first call to the start num sum up method, with sum being 14. We know start num is equal to 1, so this is going to return 15. And then our main method prints the value 15. And that is a trace of recursion. Can you put a print statement inside the recursion? Okay, so we want to put a print statement in the recursion. So we do system so let's do start num equals start num end num equals end num and sum equals whatever our sum is. That's it. Oh, right. That's not part of the code. But instead of deleting it, I'm just going to comment it. Okay. So here, take a look at where I put my print statement. It's after the recursive call. So, as we saw down here, so the very last time we just, in the end case, we don't have a print statement, so nothing is being printed where start num equals 5. But we do start num is equal to 4, the end num is 5, and the sum we received was 5. Then it's the previous call before that. It's the start num is 3, end num is 5, sum is 9, and so on. So, cause it's, why does it ignore end num after sum up for 5? Oh, you mean why it doesn't have a print statement? So this is the comment from Rap Gang. Why does it ignore the end num after sum up for 5? That's because our print statement is down here. And when it reaches end num equals start num, it just prints, it just returns the method call. If you set it to end num minus 1 instead of start num, we could go the other way. Infinite loop, change the base case. So if I do start num equals start num minus 1, then yes, it'll keep recursing backwards. But I could change it to, instead of going from start num to end num, we can go backwards from end num to start num. So our start num remains the same, but our end num is here. So let's try this again. It just it gives us a, oh, so this would be not start num, this would be plus end num. So we're changing the way we recurse, but that changes the behavior of the method itself. Externally, it's supposed to do the same thing as it did before, but internally, it's behaving differently. Compile it, run it, we get the end result as the same. If you do input end num equals -1 as a parameter, it'll be infinite. Yes. So if our end num is less than our start num, then it'll go on indefinitely. So let's say if we have our start num as 1, or rather 5, and our end num as 1, it's just need to compile first. it's going to keep on going. And then it's going to crash with the Stack Overflow error. That's one way of making it go infinitely. But one thing I could do is I can put up a check here. If nnum is less than startnum, throw new illegal argument exception. So I can do something like this. I can manually put in a check, or another thing I could do is I can place in a precondition saying, this is a requirement that startnum is less than endnum. Now, of course, since this is documentation, it doesn't actually affect the code, but the idea here is to tell the programmer or whoever is using this method to make sure that this is the case with the input you provide. Okay. Is that a good explanation for recursion? Do we have any other questions? Or should I move on to polymorphism? Which I would say we've already kind of covered, but I can go over it again for a little while. Okay, so I'll take that silence as a... Oh, actually, there was a question here. Did the recursive call in one return statement ditching the if statement and using ternary operator? When you return 5 at the recursion ending, is that number used for anything? Can you cover upcasting and downcasting? Especially the main methods are called. Okay. So do one question at a time. So when you return 5 at the recursion end statement, is the number used for anything? So going back here. So when we had our normal input, when we return 5 here, well, that's the sum that the previous method call receives. Because the sum from 5 to 5 is just the number 5. And that number, then we add 4, then 3, then 2, then 1 to get our final value. Okay, and then real cheese 2. Upcasting and downcasting. I think that's the beyond the scope of this course. I don't think we came across it. Because I don't remember seeing anything anything relating to that in this course. If there was, please correct me. Send me. Let me know when we covered it, and then I can see the appropriate material for it. But going towards polymorphism, let's open up some of our old classes. There is nStaff, staff, sword and weapon. Close all to the left. Okay, the topic was introduced in the book. Was that one of the assigned readings? I don't think it was. Good. So trace questions, we're going to come back to those because we want to stay on topic. Let's do polymorphism first, and then we can go back to previous topics we've already visited. Polymorphism works with having with inheritance. So we have a class type weapon, but it can have subclasses, as we saw when we were talking about these abstract classes. There was a sword, there was a staff, but they're both weapons. Each of these classes, we know as a weapon, where we had the weapon interface. They have a method called do damage. So we know a weapon can do damage, but how it does damage is dependent on which child class we're looking at. If you say the do damage method in a sword class, it prints out Frostmourne Hungers. If we take a look at the do damage in our nStaff class, which is once again a child of staff, which in turn is a child of weapon, so nStaff is a descendant of weapon, it prints out hello world. So if we actually go back to our main method, and we have these two types of weapons. Now notice that the reference here is of type weapon, not of sword or nStaff. We can say weapon dot do damage here. It's going to take internally. It's going to take a look at what's the actual type of this reference. So internally, it's a sword. So it's going to call the do damage method in our sword class, which is right here. For the next weapon, it's an nStaff type weapon. It's going to call this particular do damage method. So the reference itself sees kind of like the outside picture of what's going on. It's a weapon, it can do damage. But how it does damage is actually dependent on its concrete classes. A sword and an nStaff both do damage, but they do differently because the method implementations are different from one another. And that's the general idea of polymorphism. Shutterfly, that's a really good explanation, yes. Because every student is a person, but not every person is a student. So this is another way you can take a look at this, because in our case, every staff is a weapon, but not every weapon is a staff. So do we have any other questions regarding polymorphism? I mean, I went over just a basic description of it, but I don't know what else to cover, especially what we've already covered with abstract classes and interfaces. So coming back to Wish's question for practice. So to be honest, I'm not sure of any particular sources, I would recommend taking a look at your own the assignments that we've done, the individual and the team exercises, your project itself, and take a look at how are the method calls being done there and trace those. If you're working with your project, it should be code that you're really comfortable with, and you should be able to trace that. You can always ask your friends to quiz each other, so you can create a sample code, your friend creates a sample code, and you can have each other trace it. Other sources, so there's so much resources out there. There's different kinds of textbooks, online tutorials, YouTube videos. Best idea is to find one you like and try to follow those. All right, so McLovin, I would request that please be respectable. This is online, and we still want to have a professional environment here. And if other people have specific resources that I'm seeing here is David. Thank you for posting that link. If it is, looks like University of Washington. You can share those resources with one another online as well. We have the D2L discussion forum. Osama, yes, this stream is being recorded, and once it's finished, I'll post it on my YouTube channel. You can also view it on the Twitch channel as well. Alrighty. I'm not sure if Dr. Verwal would post the solutions to the exercise to the practice final. Best thing to do is send her an email asking if she will, and don't have everyone send this email. Choose a representative who will send this email, and then she can reply, or you can post it on the D2L forum to see if the solutions will be posted. Normally, some instructors try to avoid this, so students don't look at the solutions and think that they just, they understand how it works. It's a different way of teaching. So real cheese, go over compile packages in command line. Okay, do that real quick. So let's take a look. All right, so I'm gonna put these classes into a package. So when we're compiling packages, we want to be in the parent directory. So we want to be, in our case, our files are located in this folder called review. I'm not sure if it's too small to see up here, but they're located in this folder called review. That's why we named our package review. We want to be in our parent folder, which contains review itself. And then to compile, we would do javac review / sort.java. File contains wrong class weapon interface. Ooh, what did I do here? Make it appear in the correct subdirectory. It is in the correct subdirectory. Okay, having some issue creating the package itself. Gonna see it sounds. Okay. We do verify the solutions. So for these specific questions regarding verifying the solutions for the final exam, I don't have any authority over that. That would be the best thing would be to ask the instructor for this. Okay, so we have a question about JUnit testing. Okay, JUnit testing is a type of testing to make sure that your classes behave properly. So from our projects, since if we had a good object-oriented design, we had different classes. So for example, let's say if we have a battleship type of project, you know, the board game of Battleship, you may have classes such as a ship itself, player, the board. So let's say we have these 3 different types of classes. You want to make sure that they all behave properly, and the test should be limited to the class itself. So let's say if the battleship class has a method which you know, take a hit, and what you expect that method to do is to reduce the hit points of your ship or remove one of the pieces on the ship. What you want to do is call the method and see has your class or has your object changed appropriately. Another better example might be here is so let's say you have your grid class, which contains a bunch of ships. The enemy fires upon your grid, and now the grid, it could be either a hit or a miss. So in the case of it is a hit, it should see that the appropriate ship has taken the appropriate amount of damage based on that hit. If it's a miss, then you know, none of these ships should have taken any damage. So it's for checking expected behavior of your classes. And I don't know how much of it I should discuss, because you know, you can have whole courses on testing. I think the university does have courses just on how to do proper testing. You're welcome, Anon. Okay. Right. So one way to take a brief look at the JUnit testing is to take a look at the testing we provided for the individual exercises. Those were JUnit tests. And each exercise expected you to create either a method or a series of methods which had some expected outcome. It could be a return value, could be changing the values of instant variables. And the JUnit tested for that behavior. So I think going into extensive testing is probably beyond the scope of this course, but we were expected to do just a little bit, at least for our project. Okay, so do we have any other questions regarding the review of the topics that we covered? If not, then I would like to call it an evening. Actually have some dinner. I have pizza getting cold from 6 o'clock. You're welcome, Solo and Anand. And thank you guys for coming to the review. Hope it was beneficial. And good luck on the final exam coming up this following week. Do make sure that you look at your individual exercises grades. All the grades have been posted. If there is an issue that you expected that your test passed, but you got a 0 on it, maybe there was an issue with your student ID or the get ID method, send me an email about it. Do include which exercise you're referring to and your tutorial number. That will make my job much easier to finding which tutorial you're enrolled in. I catch it. Okay, so we have real cheese. So when my class throws an exception, I catch it where I declared the class. So you don't catch the exception where you declared the class. You catch the exception on whichever method called the exception throwing method. So in case we have where we had something which threw an exception, I think it was a file IO example. So this is our main method. So let's just call this M2. So let's say if we have another method, actually, which is main, and from here we call M2. We know that M2 can possibly throw out array index out of bounds exception. So we need to catch this exception here. And then do something. So this is important with the the method call tracing. This was the method which called M2. So the exception is going to be thrown here, meaning this method call has to be surrounded by a try-catch block. So Demi, if that's the case, I would definitely recommend contacting Dr. Raval if she has office hours this week before the final. Do that. Otherwise, email. And this should have been something that you brought up a while ago, because I think those marks have been posted for a while. So does it work when I have a class declared like public class? So if you have something like public class file throws whatever. Personally, I have never used this before. I haven't really seen anything like this because classes don't throw exceptions, methods do. So I'm not sure if that would work. We can try it. Sorry, CD review. Yeah, so classes cannot throw exceptions. Methods throw exceptions. All right, so I guess that was the last of the questions. I would like to call it a night and wish you guys good luck. Thank you for joining in. This had been Zan from Zan's Gaming and Java Games Programming. See you next time.